Audio log transcript, KRMX radio station, emergency broadcast equipment. Recovered from Terminal 3, Station Engineer Office. Date, March 15th, 2025, 2:47 a.m. Recording begins. Christ, I don't even know why I'm recording this. Maybe because everything feels so wrong right now, and I need something, anything, to anchor me to what's real. My name is Soren Pike. I'm the overnight engineer at KRMX, been working emergency broadcast systems for 8 years. What happened tonight? I've never seen anything like it. It started normal enough. Tuesday night shift, 2:30 a.m., dead quiet except for the automated feeds and the endless hum of cooling fans. The emergency alert system had been acting up all week. Random test signals, minor glitches in the EAS decoder. Nothing unusual. These systems are temperamental, built on protocols from the 80s with digital patches layered on like scar tissue. I was calibrating the backup transmitter when every screen in the facility exploded with light. Not gradually, not a normal alert sequence. Every monitor, every display, every LED status indicator blazed white-hot simultaneously, like someone had detonated a flare inside the electronics. The sound hit next, that bone-deep emergency tone, but amplified beyond anything in the specifications. I've heard that tone thousands of times during tests, but this was different. Deeper. It seemed to vibrate through my chest cavity, making my teeth ache. The text crawled across every screen in that stark, blocky font reserved for genuine emergencies. Emergency alert system. Attention, attention, attention. White House confirms nuclear strike imminent. Omega directive issued. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a test. My hands were shaking as I reached for the manual override. 8 years of training kicked in. Verify the source, check authentication codes, contact the National Weather Service. But the authentication looked legitimate. Every protocol indicator showed green. The source traceback pointed to FEMA headquarters, then to the Pentagon, then to some facility I'd never heard of. The smell of burning electronics filled the air. 3 monitors had overloaded, their screens cracked and dark. The temperature in the broadcast room spiked as every piece of equipment ran at maximum output, fans screaming like jet engines. I could taste copper and ozone, that metallic tang that comes when circuits push beyond their limits. I grabbed my phone to call Nissa, my sister. She works nights at Presbyterian Hospital downtown. If anyone would know about emergency preparations, it would be her. The phone rang 6 times before she picked up. Soren? What the hell is happening? The hospital's going insane. Every TV, every computer, every goddamn pager is screaming about nuclear. I know. I'm seeing it here too. Are you getting evacuation orders? That's just it. Her voice was tight, stressed. Nobody knows what to do. The alerts don't specify a target, don't give shelter locations, nothing. Just seek immediate shelter. Half the staff think it's a test gone wrong. Through the control room windows, I could see the city below starting to react. Lights flicking on in apartment buildings, cars pulling out of driveways, the distant wail of sirens mixing with car alarms. But it felt muted, uncertain, like people couldn't decide if this was real or another false alarm. Nissa, listen to me. Stay at the hospital. It's a solid building, and if this is real. If? Soren, what do you mean if? I stared at the cascade of alerts still flooding every screen. Something was wrong with the timing. Emergency alerts follow strict protocols, duration, repetition intervals, escalation procedures. These were looping continuously, each cycle slightly different from the last. The authentication codes kept changing, cycling through valid sequences too quickly to be manual input. The broadcast patterns are off, I told her. I think there might be a malfunction in the system. A major one. Or, she said, and I could hear the fear creeping into her voice, someone's actually about to nuke us. After we hung up, I tried to follow protocol. Called the State Emergency Management Office, busy signal. Tried the FCC emergency line, busy signal. Attempted to reach the National Weather Service. The call wouldn't even connect. It was like the entire emergency communication infrastructure had overloaded simultaneously. The alerts kept coming, wave after wave, each one slightly more urgent than the last. But buried in the repetition, I started noticing inconsistencies. Timestamps that didn't match. Geographic codes that referenced areas that didn't exist. And strangest of all, audio signatures that seemed too clean, too perfectly balanced for emergency broadcasts pushed through aging infrastructure. I pulled up the spectral analysis software, something I'd used to debug audio problems. The emergency tone looked wrong on the display, too symmetrical, too precisely calibrated. Natural audio, even computer-generated tones, has imperfections, tiny variations. This was perfect, mathematically perfect. That's when the second alert came through, different from the first. Same blaring alarms, same screen-filling urgency, but the message had changed. Emergency alert system. Previous alert contained errors. Stand by for correction. Do not panic. Further instructions will follow. And then nothing. The correction never came. The screens went dark. The alert stopped. Even the normal automation fell silent. For the first time in 8 years, the emergency broadcast system was completely, utterly quiet. I'm still sitting here waiting. The city outside has settled into an uneasy calm, like everyone's holding their breath. My coffee has gone cold. The equipment hums its normal tune, as if nothing happened. But the smell of burnt electronics lingers, and 3 monitors remain cracked and dark. What scares me most isn't the nuclear threat. It's that a system designed to save lives just lied to an entire city, and I have no idea why. The correction never came. But I'm starting to think that's not a malfunction. Recording ends. Audio log transcript, KRMX radio station, emergency broadcast equipment. Recovered from Terminal 3, Station Engineer Office. Date, March 16th, 2025, 4:23 a.m. Recording begins. I should have gone home. Should have clocked out after the alert stopped and pretended this was someone else's problem. But I can't stop thinking about those authentication codes, the way they cycled through valid sequences too fast for human input. So I stayed digging deeper into the system logs, and what I found. Christ, I wish I hadn't looked. The nuclear alerts didn't come from FEMA. They didn't come from the Pentagon. They didn't come from any official government source at all. I spent 2 hours tracing the signal path backward through the emergency alert network, following digital breadcrumbs through routing tables and authentication logs. The alerts originated from a server farm in Nevada. Not military, not government. Corporate. Registered to something called Minebridge Solutions, LLC. A company that doesn't seem to exist anywhere else online. But that's not the worst part. While I was digging through the logs, my equipment picked up a transmission on the military emergency frequency. Encrypted, but the encryption was old, something I recognized from my Army National Guard days. I still had the decryption software on my personal laptop, a leftover from weekend exercises I used to run. The voice that came through was young, male, stressed. Tower, this is Communications Specialist Lennox, Air Force Base Kirtland. Request immediate clarification on Omega Directive protocols. We're showing no official authorization for last night's civilian alert broadcasts. Repeat, no official authorization in our system. A different voice responded, older, more controlled. Specialist Lennox, you are to cease all inquiries regarding Omega Directive immediately. Classification level exceeds your clearance. Acknowledge and comply. Sir, with respect, civilian alert systems aren't classified. If there's been a malfunction, there has been no malfunction. You will delete all records of this conversation and return to standard duties. This is a direct order. Static filled the channel for several seconds before the younger voice came back, quieter. Acknowledged, sir. Lennox out. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, pulse hammering in my temples. Military personnel were questioning the same alerts that had flooded my systems. Someone with enough authority to shut down an Air Force communications specialist was covering something up. The fluorescent lights above my workstation began to flicker, casting strobing shadows across the equipment racks. The building's electrical system had been acting up all winter, but the timing felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. I tried calling Nissa again. No answer. Tried her work number at the hospital. The call wouldn't connect. Not busy, not voicemail. Just dead air, like the number didn't exist. That's when I decided to monitor the military frequency continuously. If there was more chatter about Omega Directive, I wanted to hear it. I rigged up a recording system and let it run while I continued analyzing the alert logs. Around 6 a.m., just as dawn light started seeping through the windows, another transmission came through. Any station, any station. This is Bravo 77 requesting emergency frequency for unencrypted transmission. I grabbed the microphone. Broadcasting on military frequencies was illegal for civilians, but something in the voice made me respond. Bravo 77, this is KRMX radio. Go ahead. KRMX, thank God. Listen carefully. My name is Breck Lennox, Air Force Communications. I think you might be the broadcast engineer who's been digging into last night's alerts. My blood went cold. How do you know that? Because someone's been monitoring communications traffic, flagging anyone who questions the Omega Directive. Your station's been pinging government servers all night. You need to stop. Now. The metallic taste was back in my mouth, stronger than before. I'm just trying to understand what happened. Those alerts were not authorized by any legitimate government agency. I've checked every database I have access to. But here's what's really fucked up. Someone's been inserting Omega Directive references into classified systems for weeks. Retroactively. Making it look like it's always been there. The fluorescent light above me popped and went dark, leaving me in the pale glow of monitor screens. What do you mean retroactively? I mean someone with serious access has been rewriting history in real time. Military databases, emergency protocols, even training manuals. All showing references to something called Omega Directive that didn't exist a month ago. Through the speakers, I could hear the distant sound of aircraft engines. Military aircraft. Lennox, where are you calling from? Kirtland Air Base, but not for long. I'm being transferred to a facility I've never heard of. Something called Project Mindbridge. They're sending a transport in 20 minutes. Mindbridge. The same name from the server logs. Jesus Christ, I whispered. KRMX, I need you to listen very carefully. Whatever you found in those logs, whatever trail you've been following, you need to stop. These people, whoever they are, they have access to systems that shouldn't exist. They can rewrite official records, monitor civilian communications, and apparently trigger false emergency alerts across the entire country. The sound of engines was getting closer. But more than that, Lennox continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, I think last night was just a test. Whatever Omega Directive really is, it's not about nuclear threats. It's about something else entirely. Static erupted across the frequency, harsh and overwhelming. When it cleared, a different voice was speaking, the same older, controlled voice from the earlier transmission. Mr. Pike, this is your only warning. Discontinue your investigation immediately. Return to normal broadcast operations. Forget what you heard tonight. They knew my name. They knew I was listening. The line went dead. Complete silence across all frequencies. I sat in the semi-darkness, surrounded by the quiet hum of electronics and the distant sound of aircraft circling the city. Through the window, I could see military helicopters silhouetted against the dawn sky. That's when I noticed something that made my hands start shaking again. The voice recordings on my laptop, both Lennox's transmissions and the older voice giving orders, had audio signatures identical to the emergency alerts from last night. Same mathematical perfection, same impossible clarity. Someone had synthesized those voices, generated them artificially. But which voices were real? Lennox warning me to stop, or Lennox asking questions about Omega Directive? The older voice giving orders, or the older voice threatening me? I don't know if I've been talking to real people or sophisticated audio simulations. I don't know if Air Force Communications Specialist Breck Lennox actually exists, or if he's an elaborate fiction designed to make me think I have an ally. What I do know is that someone is watching. Someone with the power to rewrite government databases, trigger false emergency alerts, and generate convincing voice communications in real time. And somehow, they know exactly who I am. The aircraft sounds are fading now, but I can still taste metal in the air. Still feel that lingering sense that nothing I've heard tonight can be trusted. I'm going to keep recording these logs, hiding them in the station's backup systems. If something happens to me, maybe someone else will find them. Maybe someone else will figure out what Omega Directive really means. Recording ends. Audio log transcript, KRMX radio station, emergency broadcast equipment. Recovered from Terminal 3, Station Engineer Office. Date, March 16, 2025, 11:47 a.m. Recording begins. She arrived at exactly 11:30 a.m., 15 minutes after I'd finally dozed off at my workstation. The knock on the station's front door was precise, measured, 3 sharp raps that cut through the morning quiet like a blade. I should have pretended no one was here. Should have stayed hidden in the back room with my equipment and my growing pile of evidence. Instead, I walked to the front lobby and found myself face to face with a woman in a charcoal gray suit that looked like it cost more than my monthly salary. "Mr. Pike?" She held up a leather credential folder, the kind that screamed federal authority. "I'm Amaris Cross, FEMA Regional Coordinator. I understand you've been experiencing some technical difficulties with your emergency broadcast systems." The way she said it, technical difficulties, made my skin crawl. Like what I'd discovered was just a glitch in the software, a minor inconvenience that could be smoothed over with the right paperwork. "I wasn't aware FEMA made house calls for equipment problems," I said, not moving from the doorway. Her smile was perfect, practiced, and completely empty. "May I come in? We have some things to discuss." The lobby felt smaller with her in it, like the walls had shifted inward. She moved through the space with the confidence of someone who'd been here before, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum in a rhythm that seemed too deliberate. Everything about her was precise. The way she set her briefcase on the reception desk, the way she adjusted her jacket, the way she looked at me like she could see through my skull into my thoughts. "Coffee?" I offered, mostly to buy time to think. "That's very kind, but I'm fine." She opened her briefcase with a soft leather sigh. "I'm here about the alerts you received last night. More specifically about your investigation into their origins." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her face. In the artificial light, her skin looked pale, almost translucent, and her eyes held a quality I couldn't quite place. "Not quite human, not quite machine. How did you know I was investigating anything?" "Mr. Pike, when someone spends 6 hours querying federal databases and monitoring encrypted military communications, it tends to attract attention." She pulled out a tablet, swiped through several screens. Quite a lot of attention, actually. My mouth went dry. I was just trying to understand what happened. "Those alerts didn't follow normal protocols." "No, they didn't." She set the tablet on the desk, angled so I could see the screen. It showed a network diagram, connections between servers, routing paths, authentication logs. Everything I'd discovered, laid out in perfect detail. But then, normal protocols weren't designed for events like Omega Directive. The name hit me like a physical blow. Hearing it spoken aloud, casually, as if it were common knowledge. "What is Omega Directive?" "A comprehensive emergency response protocol developed in conjunction with the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security, designed to test civilian readiness for large-scale crisis events." She touched the screen, zooming in on specific network nodes. "The alerts you received were part of a controlled assessment of emergency broadcast effectiveness." The air in the room felt thick, almost viscous. I could taste that metallic flavor again, stronger now, like breathing through copper wire. "Controlled assessment? You mean psychological experiment?" "I mean exactly what I said." Her voice carried an edge now, sharp as broken glass. "The American people need to be prepared for genuine threats. Nuclear, biological, cyber warfare. The traditional methods of emergency communication have proven inadequate. Too many people ignore warnings, dismiss them as false alarms." Through the window, I could see a white sedan parked across the street. Government plates. 2 figures in dark suits sitting in the front seats, watching the station. "So you decided to terrify an entire population with fake nuclear alerts?" "We decided to measure response effectiveness under conditions of genuine perceived threat." She swiped to another screen, showing population density maps overlaid with response data. Preliminary results indicate a 347% increase in compliance with emergency directives when subjects believe the threat is immediate and existential. Subjects? She called them subjects. And what about the people who figured out the alerts were fake? People like me. People like you are exactly why we need more sophisticated protocols. She closed the tablet with a soft click. Traditional emergency systems assume civilian cooperation. They don't account for individuals with technical expertise who might attempt to verify or debunk official communications. The fluorescent light above us flickered, casting strobing shadows across her face. In the intermittent darkness, her features seemed to shift, becoming less human and more algorithmic. "That's why we developed the Omega Directive's secondary parameters," she continued. Real-time response to resistance. Adaptive countermeasures for non-compliant individuals. Countermeasures? She reached into her briefcase again, this time pulling out a small device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a medical scanner. The screen showed a three-dimensional map of the radio station, with heat signatures indicating my location and hers. Mr. Pike, for the past 7 hours, you've been exposed to specific low-frequency audio signals embedded in the emergency alert transmissions. Frequencies below the range of human hearing, but well within the range of human neurological response. The taste of metal was overwhelming now, like sucking on a battery. My hands began to shake. You're telling me those alerts contain subliminal programming? I'm telling you that modern emergency protocols require more than simple audio warnings. They require neurological compliance mechanisms. Ways to ensure that critical information reaches the civilian population regardless of individual skepticism or resistance. She held up the device, and I could see my own biosignature on the screen. Heart rate, brain activity, stress hormones. All of it elevated, all of it being monitored in real time. The beautiful thing about Omega Directive is its scalability. We can target specific individuals, specific populations, or if necessary, the entire civilian infrastructure of the United States. All through the same emergency broadcast systems people have been trained to trust for decades. My vision was starting to blur around the edges. The room felt like it was tilting, the walls closing in. What did you do to me? What we're doing to everyone, Mr. Pike. We're making you more receptive to official guidance, more compliant with emergency directives, more willing to accept the information we provide without excessive questioning. The device in her hand began to emit a soft, pulsing tone, barely audible, but I could feel it resonating in my bones. The same frequency signature I'd detected in the original alerts. The initial phase was broad spectrum, designed to establish baseline compliance across the test population. But individuals like you, technically proficient, naturally suspicious, require more targeted intervention. You're mind-controlling people through emergency alerts. We're optimizing civilian response protocols through neurological enhancement. The terminology is less important than the results. She touched the device's screen, and the pulsing tone intensified. Phase 2 involves personalized frequency modulation based on individual resistance patterns. Phase 3 introduces behavioral modification through repeated exposure. Phase 4. The tone was inside my head now, vibrating through my skull like a tuning fork. I could feel my thoughts becoming sluggish, my resistance weakening. Phase 4 is complete integration with the Omega Directive Network. Seamless cooperation between civilian population and emergency management systems. No more resistance, no more questioning, no more individuals who think they know better than the experts. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt thick and unresponsive. The room was spinning, the fluorescent lights leaving trailing patterns across my vision. Don't fight it, Mr. Pike. Fighting only makes the process more painful. Your sister Nissa is already progressing nicely through Phase 3. By tomorrow, she'll be a model citizen, compliant, cooperative, eager to follow official guidance. Nissa. The mention of my sister cut through the fog in my mind like a blade. I forced myself to focus, to push back against the overwhelming urge to simply agree with everything this woman was saying. What? What did you do to her? The same thing we're doing to you. The same thing we're going to do to every person in this country who thinks they can question official emergency protocols. She stepped closer, the device in her hand pulsing with increased intensity. The Omega Directive isn't just about emergency response, Mr. Pike. It's about creating a population that can be guided, controlled, optimized for national security purposes. The metallic taste was so strong now I could barely breathe. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice was screaming that this was wrong, that I had to resist, that I had to find a way to stop this. You're not FEMA, I managed to whisper. Her smile widened, showing teeth that seemed too white, too perfect. FEMA, Mindbridge Solutions, the Department of Defense. We're all part of the same initiative now, Mr. Pike. The Omega Directive requires cooperation across all levels of government and private sector. She held up the device, and I could see my own brain activity on the screen, neural pathways lighting up and dimming in patterns that seemed almost musical. In approximately 30 seconds, you're going to forget about your investigation. You're going to delete all the files you've collected. You're going to return to normal broadcast operations and never question emergency alerts again. But even as she spoke, I could feel part of my mind fragmenting, splitting away from the growing compliance. Some core part of who I was, refusing to be absorbed into their system. And if I don't, then you'll join the other non-compliant individuals in our Phase 5 facility. A place where people who can't be integrated into the Omega Directive spend the rest of their lives contributing to our research. The automated voice of the emergency alert system suddenly crackled to life from the speakers around us. Attention. Omega Directive Phase 2 initiated. All personnel report for individual assessment. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance is futile. The voice was mine. My own voice, speaking words I'd never said, broadcast across the emergency network to every radio and television in the city. How? Voice synthesis, Mr. Pike. We've been sampling your speech patterns for weeks. Soon, every emergency alert in the country will carry the voices of trusted local broadcasters, people the community knows and respects. People like you. Recording ends. Audio log transcript, KRMX radio station, emergency broadcast equipment. Recovered from Terminal 3, Station Engineer Office. Date, March 16, 2025, 6:15 p.m. Recording begins. The headache started 20 minutes after Amorous Cross left. Not the dull throb of too much caffeine or too little sleep. This was different. Sharp, precise, like someone was running electrical current through specific neural pathways. It pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, each surge accompanied by a high-pitched whine that seemed to come from inside my skull. I tried to convince myself it was stress, exhaustion, the natural aftermath of discovering a government conspiracy to mind control the civilian population. But deep down, I knew better. Those subliminal frequencies she'd mentioned, the ones embedded in the emergency alerts, they were still working on me, even hours after exposure. The copper taste in my mouth had evolved into something more complex, more nauseating, like licking a battery while chewing aluminum foil. My hands trembled as I loaded fresh audio analysis software onto my workstation, trying to isolate the exact frequencies that had been hidden in the alerts. What I found made my blood run cold. The emergency broadcasts contained not one but 7 distinct subliminal carriers, each operating at different frequencies below the threshold of conscious hearing. Mathematical analysis revealed they were designed to synchronize with specific brainwave patterns, alpha, beta, theta, delta. The same frequencies used in experimental mind control research dating back to the 1950s. But these weren't crude, broad-spectrum attempts at influence. These were precisely calibrated, individually tailored audio weapons designed to bypass conscious resistance and directly manipulate neurological function. I was studying the frequency patterns when my phone rang. Nissa's number. Hey, Cease. How are you holding up after last night? I'm fine, Soren. Her voice was different, flatter, more measured. Like she was reading from a script. The hospital handled the emergency well. Very professional response to the nuclear threat. Nuclear threat? Nissa, there was no nuclear threat. Those alerts were fake. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the ambient hum of the radio equipment. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted, becoming more aggressive, more challenging. That's a very dangerous thing to say, Soren. Questioning official emergency communications undermines public safety. People could die if they don't take threats seriously. The words sounded wrong coming from her mouth. Nissa had always been skeptical of authority, quick to question official narratives. The woman on the phone sounded like a government spokesperson. Nissa, listen to me carefully. Do you remember what we talked about last night? How the alert seemed strange, how they didn't follow normal protocols. I remember you being paranoid and irresponsible. I remember you putting people at risk with your conspiracy theories. Her voice was rising now, taking on an edge I'd never heard before. The Omega Directive exists to protect citizens from threats they're not qualified to understand. People like you who think they know better than the experts are the real danger. Omega Directive. She'd used the exact phrase Amorous Cross had used, spoken with the same tone of absolute certainty. Jesus Christ, Nisa. What did they do to you? They helped me see clearly. They helped me understand my civic responsibilities. The aggressive edge was gone now, replaced by something worse, complete, serene compliance. You should report to the nearest emergency management facility for assessment, Soren. They can help you too. The line went dead. I sat staring at my phone, watching the call duration timer tick away seconds of silence. My sister, the woman who'd spent her teenage years raging against high school dress codes and college tuition hikes, was telling me to voluntarily submit to government mind control. The subliminal frequencies hadn't just affected her behavior. They'd rewritten her personality. I pulled up the audio analysis again, this time focusing on the specific patterns that might target individual psychological profiles. What I discovered was even more horrifying than I'd imagined. The Omega Directive wasn't using random subliminal programming. It was using personalized neurological manipulation based on detailed psychological profiles. Someone had access to medical records, social media activity, purchasing histories, employment records, enough data to create individual compliance signatures for every person in the country. Nissa's signature would have emphasized her natural empathy, her desire to help others, her trust in medical authority. The frequencies would have gradually shifted her perspective, making resistance to official guidance feel like betrayal of her patients, her community, her duty as a healthcare worker. My signature would be different. They'd target my technical curiosity, my need to understand how systems work, my protective instincts toward my sister. They'd try to make compliance feel like the smart choice, the logical choice, the only choice that could keep the people I cared about safe. The headache was getting worse, accompanied now by a subtle vibration in my inner ear. I realized with growing horror that my own phone was emitting subliminal frequencies, not loudly enough to be consciously detected, but strong enough to gradually influence my thoughts. I switched the phone off and threw it across the room. That's when I noticed the other devices. The emergency broadcast equipment was still active, still receiving signals from the Omega Directive network. My computer monitors were displaying imperceptible flicker patterns designed to synchronize with the audio frequencies. Even the fluorescent lights were pulsing at subliminal rates, creating a comprehensive sensory assault on my neural pathways. I was sitting in the middle of a sophisticated mind control laboratory, and I'd been there for hours. The realization should have sent me running from the building. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The headache was fading, replaced by a warm, pleasant sensation of acceptance. My breathing slowed, my heart rate normalized, and for the first time in hours, I felt genuinely relaxed. It would be so easy to just give in, to accept that people smarter than me, with access to information I couldn't understand, were making decisions for my own good. To trust that the Omega Directive represented humanity's best hope for survival in an increasingly dangerous world. The thought felt natural, reasonable, almost inevitable. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice was screaming. I forced myself to focus on that voice, to amplify it against the growing tide of compliance. I thought about Nissa's flat, emotionless tone, about amorous crosses in human smile, about the white sedan with government plates that was probably still parked across the street. The warm feeling of acceptance began to crack, revealing the cold machinery of manipulation beneath. I stumbled to the equipment rack and started shutting down systems. First the emergency broadcast receivers, then the computer monitors, finally the overhead lights. With each device I disabled, the subliminal pressure in my head decreased. But even in the relative silence of the darkened station, I could hear it, a low, persistent hum coming from outside. Street lights, cell phone towers, traffic signals, digital billboards. The entire urban infrastructure was part of the Omega Directive network, broadcasting compliance frequencies 24 hours a day. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from the signal. My phone buzzed with a text message, despite being switched off. The screen lit up with impossible brightness. Emergency alert. Citizens report increased aggression and non-compliance following exposure to anti-government propaganda. Seek immediate medical attention if you experience paranoid thoughts about official emergency communications. Help is available. Compliance is healing. More messages followed in rapid succession. Your sister Nisabel has been successfully integrated into Phase 3 protocols. She is happy, healthy, and eager to serve her community. Report to Mindbridge Solutions facility for voluntary assessment. Transportation will be provided. Resistance increases psychological damage. Acceptance leads to peace. You are not alone. We are here to help. The messages kept coming, each one perfectly calibrated to address my specific fears and motivations. They knew exactly what to say to make surrender seem like the logical choice. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd shown me how the system worked. They'd revealed the scope of their manipulation, the depth of their control, the extent of their reach. And in doing so, they'd given me the one thing I needed to resist them: complete, absolute certainty that they were the enemy. I grabbed my laptop and started typing, documenting everything I'd discovered about the Omega Directive's subliminal programming. If I was going to lose my mind to their frequencies, at least I could leave a record for someone else to find. Someone who might be strong enough to fight back. The headache was returning, stronger than before. But this time I welcomed the pain. It meant I was still fighting. It meant some part of me remained unconquered. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching. Military aircraft, probably carrying more of Amorous Cross's colleagues, coming to finish what their subliminal frequencies had started. I had maybe 20 minutes before they arrived. 20 minutes to document the truth about Omega Directive before they dragged me away to their Phase 5 facility. 20 minutes to remain myself before I became another compliant citizen in their perfect, controlled world. Recording ends. Audio log transcript, KRMX radio station, emergency broadcast equipment. Recovered from Terminal 3, Station Engineer Office. Date, March 16, 2025, 8:45 p.m. Recording begins. The helicopters circled for exactly 18 minutes before landing. I know because I timed them, watching their searchlights sweep across the station's windows while I uploaded my research to every file-sharing platform I could access. The smell of burning ozone filled the air as my equipment overheated from the data transfer, but I pushed everything harder, faster, beyond safe operating parameters. They weren't going to let me finish. I could feel their interference growing stronger with each passing minute. Not just the subliminal frequencies now, but active electronic countermeasures. My internet connection kept dropping. Files corrupted mid-upload. The screen flickered with static that formed almost recognizable patterns, like words trying to write themselves across my vision. The taste of copper had evolved into something medicinal, antiseptic, like the air in a hospital operating room. My hands trembled as I fought to maintain control of my own equipment, watching system after system lock me out with administrator-level overrides I hadn't programmed. That's when Amorous Cross walked through the front door without knocking. She moved with the casual confidence of someone who owned the building, the block, probably the entire city. Her government-issued jacket was gone, replaced by something that looked expensive, tailored. Her smile was wider than before, more genuine, like she was genuinely happy to see me. "Hello, Soren. I'm impressed you lasted this long. Most subjects succumb to Phase 3 conditioning within 6 hours of concentrated exposure." Subjects? I kept typing, racing to document this conversation, even as my keyboard began registering keystrokes I wasn't making. "Is that what we are to you? You're participants in the most important psychological advancement in human history." She approached my workstation with the measured pace of a predator who knew its prey was already trapped. "The Omega Directive isn't mind control, Soren. It's mind optimization. We're helping people become the best versions of themselves." The screens around me began displaying new alerts, messages I wasn't receiving through any connected service. Emergency alert. Omega Directive Phase 3 complete. Individual resistance protocols activated. Citizens experiencing persistent paranoid thoughts should report immediately for therapeutic intervention. Resistance is a symptom of neurological dysfunction. Treatment is available. Each message appeared simultaneously on every screen in the station, even devices that weren't connected to any network. The words pulsed with subliminal flicker rates, trying to synchronize my brainwaves with their embedded programming. "You see how the technology responds to you now?" Amorous's voice carried a tone of maternal pride, like she was showing off a particularly clever child. Phase 4 integration allows us to communicate directly through any electronic device within a subject's environment. Your resistance is actually helping us refine the system. I tried to focus on my documentation, but the screens kept changing, displaying personal information that should have been impossible for them to access. Childhood photos, medical records, private conversations with Nissa from years ago. They had everything, Not just data, but memories, experiences, the fundamental building blocks of my identity. How long have you been watching me? Since you were 17. She was close enough now that I could smell her perfume, something floral with chemical undertones. You applied for a summer internship at the National Weather Service. Your psychological profile flagged you as potentially useful for Project Mindbridge. Project Mindbridge. Another piece of the puzzle, another layer of horror beneath the surface deception. The emergency broadcast system was never about nuclear threats, was it? It was about creating a delivery mechanism for mass psychological manipulation. Much more sophisticated than that. She gestured to the screens around us, now displaying complex waveform patterns that hurt to look at directly. We're not just manipulating thoughts, Soren. We're optimizing human neural architecture for collective problem solving. Individual consciousness is inefficient, prone to error, limited by biological constraints. The equipment rack behind me erupted in sparks as I pushed the data upload beyond its thermal limits. Smoke filled the air with the acrid smell of burning electronics, but I could see the progress bars still climbing. 70%. 75. If I could just hold out another few minutes. Your sister has been asking about you. Amorous' tone shifted, becoming more conversational, more personal. She's worried. She thinks you're having some kind of breakdown. Because you programmed her to think that. Because she cares about you. The conditioning doesn't eliminate emotion, Soren. It channels it more efficiently. Nissa still loves you. She wants to help you. But now she understands that sometimes helping means making difficult choices. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Nissa's number. I stared at the screen, knowing I shouldn't answer, knowing it was another trap. But the need to hear my sister's voice overrode my tactical judgment. Soren. Her voice was soft, concerned, recognizably human. Not the flat compliance tone from our last conversation. I'm at the hospital. There's been an accident. What kind of accident? A man came in an hour ago. Severe neurological trauma. He kept saying your name, kept asking us to call you. He's asking for help. The equipment around me began emitting a low harmonic whine, like feedback building in an audio system. 80% uploaded. 85. The progress was slowing as interference increased. What's his name, Nissa? Breck Lennox. He says he knows you from the radio station. Breck, the Air Force communications officer who'd been warning me about the Omega directive. They had him, and now they were using him as bait. He's hurt, Soren. Really hurt. But he won't let us treat him until he talks to you. Please come. I looked at Amorous, who was watching me with the patient expression of a chess master waiting for their opponent to make the only possible move. She nodded encouragingly, like she was genuinely supportive of my decision to walk into their trap. Nissa, listen to me very carefully. Don't trust anything the man tells you. Don't let him near any electronic equipment. And whatever you do, don't. The line went dead. Every screen in the station displayed the same message simultaneously. Imminent. Data corrupted. Resistance futile. 92%. I'd been so close. The choice is simple, Soren. Amorous moved to stand directly behind my chair, her hands resting lightly on my shoulders. You can continue fighting, continue suffering, continue watching everyone you care about slip away from you. Or you can accept Phase 4 integration and join the most important collective endeavor in human history. The whine from the equipment was getting louder, more painful. I could feel it resonating in my bones, in my teeth, in the fluid of my inner ear. The interference wasn't just electronic anymore. It was physical, biological, targeting the specific frequencies of my nervous system. What happens to individual consciousness during Phase 4? Individual consciousness is preserved as a valuable component of the collective processing matrix. You don't lose yourself, Soren. You become part of something greater. That's not an answer, because the question assumes a false dichotomy. There is no meaningful distinction between individual and collective consciousness once neural optimization is complete. The resistance you're feeling right now, that's just biological inefficiency. Fear of losing something that was always an illusion. The screens around me began displaying brain scan imagery, not generic medical illustrations, but real-time neural activity patterns. My neural activity patterns, they were mapping my thoughts in real time, analyzing the specific neurological signatures of my resistance to their programming. You're learning how to break me. We're learning how to heal you. Her grip on my shoulders tightened slightly, more reassuring than restraining. Every person who resists Phase 3 conditioning teaches us more about optimizing the integration process. Your suffering serves a greater purpose. I thought about Breck Lennox lying in a hospital bed, possibly dying, definitely compromised. I thought about Nissa treating him with compassion and medical skill that had been perverted into weapons against her own brother. I thought about millions of people across the country, gradually surrendering their individuality to a system that promised peace through submission. The upload had failed. My evidence was corrupted. The truth about Omega Directive would die with me. Unless I reached for the emergency broadcast controls, the same equipment I'd used for years to relay weather warnings and amber alerts to the local population. If I couldn't upload the data, maybe I could broadcast it directly. One final transmission before they shut me down permanently. I wouldn't recommend that, Soren. Amorous' voice carried a note of genuine regret. Emergency override protocols are already active. Any attempt to use broadcast equipment will trigger immediate neural shock therapy. Neural shock therapy? Think of it as forced optimization. Very painful, potentially permanent neurological damage, but highly effective at eliminating resistance patterns. I paused with my hand hovering over the broadcast controls. The whine from the equipment was becoming unbearable, like standing next to a jet engine. Blood was running from my nose, and my vision was starting to fragment at the edges. "The man in the hospital," I said. "Breck Lennox. That's what you did to him, isn't it? Neural shock therapy. He chose resistance over cooperation. The consequences were inevitable." My finger hovered over the transmission key. One press would activate the emergency broadcast system, would send my voice out to every radio and television in the city. But it would also trigger whatever neural weapon they'd built into the equipment. I thought about Nissa, still believing she was helping a patient who needed medical care. Still retaining enough of her original personality to feel compassion, even if that compassion was being manipulated against her. If there was any chance of saving her, of saving anyone, it was worth the risk. I pressed the key. The pain was immediate, absolute, and beyond anything I'd ever experienced. Not just physical agony, but something deeper. The sensation of my thoughts being forcibly reorganized, my memories being edited in real time, my fundamental sense of self being systematically dismantled. But for just a moment, before the neural shock overwhelmed my consciousness, I felt the transmission go through. My voice, carrying the truth about Omega Directive, broadcasting across the city's emergency frequencies. Whether anyone would be left to hear it, I no longer knew. Transmission interrupted. Recording ends. Audio log transcript, KRMX radio station, emergency broadcast equipment. Recovered from Terminal 3, Station Engineer Office. Date, March 17th, 2025, 3:22 a.m. Recording begins. I woke up to silence, not the comfortable quiet of late-night radio, not the ambient hum of sleeping equipment. Complete, absolute silence, the kind that makes your ears ring and your brain scramble to process the absence of sound. Even my own breathing seemed muffled, as if the air itself had become thicker, more resistant to vibration. The neural shock had left me unconscious for nearly 7 hours. I know because the timestamp on my workstation had advanced, but everything else remained exactly as I'd left it. My blood on the control panel had dried to a rust-brown stain. The acrid smell of burned electronics still hung in the air. Even my laptop screen showed the same corrupted upload progress bar, 92% complete, frozen in digital amber. But all the alerts had stopped. Every screen in the station displayed the same message in simple white text on black background. Signal temporarily interrupted, please stand by. No emergency warnings. No subliminal flicker patterns. No personalized psychological manipulation. Just the electronic equivalent of dead air. The silence was more terrifying than any alert they'd broadcast. I tried my phone first, expecting it to be dead after the neural shock, but it powered on normally. No missed calls. No text messages. No network connectivity despite showing full signal strength. The emergency broadcast apps that had been flooding my device with Omega Directive propaganda were gone. Not disabled, not hidden, completely removed from the phone's memory, as if they'd never existed. I checked the radio equipment next. Every frequency that had been carrying emergency broadcasts now transmitted nothing but static. Not empty static, structured static, patterned in ways that suggested intelligence behind the randomness, like the electronic equivalent of whispered conversations in a language I couldn't understand. The television monitors showed the same, signal temporarily interrupted, message across all channels. Cable news, local broadcasts, even premium streaming services. Everything had been replaced by that single, maddeningly neutral announcement. They'd cut the entire city off from the outside world. I tried calling Nissa. The phone rang once, then connected to a recorded message. The person you are trying to reach is temporarily unavailable. Please try your call again later. Her voicemail greeting had been replaced by the same sterile, automated response. Every number I tried, the hospital, the police, even the local pizza place, produced the same result. Not busy signals, not disconnections, but that same artificially polite message suggesting that everyone in the city had simultaneously become temporarily unavailable. The dust in the air had settled into unnatural patterns, like it was following invisible electromagnetic fields. I could taste it when I breathed, not just the usual particulates of urban air, but something synthetic, medicinal. The same antiseptic flavor that had accompanied Amorous Cross's presence. I forced myself to think through the implications systematically. The Omega Directive had been using emergency broadcasts to deliver subliminal programming to the population. My transmission had interrupted that process, potentially alerting people to the manipulation. So they'd responded by shutting down all communications rather than risk further exposure. But that didn't explain the silence. Total communications blackout was one thing, but this felt different. Deeper. Like they'd somehow isolated not just the city's electronic infrastructure, but the city itself. I walked to the window overlooking the main street. The scene outside confirmed my worst fears. Traffic lights cycled through their patterns, but there were no cars. Street lamps illuminated empty sidewalks. Neon signs advertising restaurants and shops flickered normally, but every building looked abandoned. The city appeared to be functioning perfectly, except for the complete absence of human activity. No, not complete absence. As I watched, a single figure walked down the center of the street with the measured pace of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. Too far away to identify, but something about their posture seemed familiar. Deliberate, purposeful. The figure stopped directly beneath the radio station and looked up at my window. Even from 4 stories up, I recognized Amorous Cross's satisfied smile. She raised her hand and waved, a casual gesture that somehow conveyed more menace than any explicit threat. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner with the same unhurried confidence. I grabbed my laptop and tried to access any external network, satellite internet, cellular data, even old dial-up connections I'd configured for emergency backup. Nothing. Every attempt to communicate beyond the immediate vicinity failed with the same generic error messages. But the internal network was still functioning. I could access the radio station's local servers, the building's security cameras, even the emergency generators in the basement. They hadn't cut power or disabled the infrastructure. They'd just sealed it off from the outside world like a laboratory specimen under glass. That's when I found the hidden partition. Buried deep in the station's server architecture was a directory I'd never seen before, protected by encryption I didn't recognize. But my administrative access worked, and when the files loaded, I understood why they'd been hidden. Personnel files, psychological profiles, medical records, not just for me, but for every person in the city. Detailed dossiers including neurological response patterns, subliminal susceptibility ratings, and something called phase integration compatibility scores. My file was marked resistant, isolated for extended observation. Nissa's file was marked integrated, monitoring ongoing. Breck Lennox's file was marked terminated, neural shock failure. But it was the citywide statistics that made my hands shake as I scrolled through them. Population, 847,293. Phase 1 complete, 847,293, 100%. Phase 2 complete, 847,293, 100%. Phase 3 complete, 846,847, 99.95%. Phase 4 integration, 846,846, 99.9999%. Resistant individuals, 0.0001%. I was alone. Not just isolated, but literally the only person in the entire city who hadn't been successfully integrated into their neural network. Everyone else, my sister, my neighbors, my co-workers, nearly 1 million people, had been transformed into components of some vast collective intelligence. The silence suddenly made perfect sense. They didn't need to communicate through electronic devices anymore. They had direct neural connections. Emergency broadcasts were obsolete when every citizen could receive instructions directly through their modified brain chemistry. I scrolled deeper into the files, looking for any information about what integration actually meant, what had happened to the people I'd known. The technical documentation was dense, filled with neurological terminology I only partially understood, but the basic concept was horrifyingly clear. Phase 4 integration didn't eliminate individual consciousness. It networked it. Every integrated person retained their memories, their personality, their sense of self, but they were all connected to a central processing system that could access and coordinate their thoughts in real time. They were still themselves, but they were also something more. A collective intelligence with nearly 1 million networked minds working in perfect coordination. And they were using the entire city as a testing ground for expanding the network to a national, then global scale. I found surveillance footage from around the city, expecting to see empty streets and abandoned buildings. Instead, I saw something far more unsettling. Normal life continuing exactly as it always had, but with subtle wrongness in every detail. People walked to work with identical pace and posture. Conversations happened in perfect synchronization, with no interruptions or awkward pauses. Traffic flowed with mathematical precision, every car maintaining optimal speed and spacing. Even casual activities like shopping or eating seemed choreographed, performed with the same eerie efficiency. They looked human. They acted human. But they moved like components in a vast machine, each playing their assigned role in a larger pattern I couldn't comprehend. I watched my sister on one of the hospital's security cameras. She was treating patients with the same gentle competence she'd always shown, but her movements were slightly too precise, her responses slightly too quick. When she spoke to other staff members, they answered before she finished her questions. When she reached for medical supplies, they were already being handed to her by colleagues who somehow knew what she needed. She was still Nissa, but she was also part of something that was decidedly not human. The files contained one final document, a detailed plan for expanding the integration network beyond the test city. Omega Directive was scheduled to go national within 6 months, using the same emergency broadcast infrastructure to deliver neural programming to every electronic device in the country. They'd proven it worked. Nearly 1 million test subjects, all successfully integrated with minimal resistance. The only remaining variable was what to do with outliers like me, the fraction of a percent who couldn't be integrated through normal means. My file contained the answer. Subject Soren Pike scheduled for direct neural interface procedure March 18, 2025. Surgical integration will be attempted if voluntary compliance cannot be achieved. Tomorrow, they were going to cut open my skull and force the connection they couldn't create through subliminal programming. I checked the time, for 17 a.m. Less than 20 hours before they turned me into another node in their vast collective intelligence. Unless I could find a way to destroy the network from the inside. I began downloading everything, the personnel files, the technical documentation, the surveillance footage, the integration schedules. If I couldn't escape, maybe I could at least document what they were doing. Leave a record for someone somewhere who might be able to stop them before they expanded beyond this city. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise over a city full of people who were no longer entirely people. And somewhere in that vast network of connected minds, they were all thinking the same thought. Tomorrow, there would be one less individual consciousness in the world, and they were all looking forward to it. Recording ends. Audio log transcript, KRMX radio station, emergency broadcast equipment. Recovered from Terminal 3, Station Engineer Office. Date, March 17, 2025, 11:47 p.m. Recording begins. They came for me at sunset. I'd spent the day preparing, downloading everything I could find about Omega Directive, copying files to every storage device in the station. 17 hours of frantic documentation, trying to preserve evidence of what they'd done to my city, my sister, nearly 1 million people who no longer existed as individuals. The knock on the station door was polite, professional. 3 precise raps that somehow conveyed more authority than any shouting or pounding could have managed. I looked through the security monitor and saw Amaris Cross standing alone on the front steps, hands clasped behind her back, wearing the same government-issued blazer she'd worn during our first meeting. No military escort, no weapons visible, just one middle-aged bureaucrat in sensible shoes, waiting patiently for me to answer. The confidence in her posture told me everything I needed to know about how this would end. "Hello, Soren." Her voice came through the intercom with crystal clarity despite the building's aging communication system. "I think it's time we finished our conversation." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I watched the street behind her, looking for the backup forces I knew had to be there. The city looked exactly as it had all day, normal life continuing with that subtle wrongness that marked the integrated population. People walking home from work, couples holding hands, children playing in the small park across the street, all of them moving with the same barely perceptible synchronization, like dancers following music only they could hear. "There's no one else coming," Amaris said, as if reading my thoughts through the camera. "We don't need force anymore, Soren. Not when we can offer something so much better." I activated the intercom. "Integration surgery, you mean? Cutting open my skull because your subliminal programming didn't work." Her laugh was genuinely amused. "Is that what you think this is about? Forcing you to join us against your will?" She shook her head. "You've misunderstood everything, Soren. We're not here to drag you kicking and screaming into the network. We're here to invite you." "Invite me to what? Lose my individuality? Become another component in your collective consciousness? To become more than you ever imagined possible?" Her voice carried an enthusiasm that seemed disturbingly genuine. "You've seen the surveillance footage. You've read the integration reports. Tell me honestly, do any of those people look unhappy? Do they seem diminished or controlled?" I thought about my sister moving through the hospital with fluid precision, anticipating every need, working in perfect harmony with her colleagues. There had been something almost beautiful about it, like watching a symphony orchestra where every musician knew exactly when to play. "They're not themselves anymore," I said. "They're more themselves than they've ever been." Amaris stepped closer to the camera, and I could see the fervent conviction in her eyes. Every fear, every doubt, every petty anxiety that used to plague them gone. Every moment of loneliness, every feeling of isolation, every struggle to understand or be understood, eliminated. They're still individuals, Soren, but they're individuals who are never alone. She gestured toward the street, where a small group of people had gathered to watch our conversation. I recognized some of them: the barista from the coffee shop down the block, the security guard from the office building next door, even Mrs. Chun who ran the flower stand on the corner. They all looked exactly like themselves, but they stood with identical posture, watching with identical expressions of patient interest. "They can hear me right now," Amaris continued. "Not through their ears, through direct neural connection. I'm sharing this conversation with everyone in the network simultaneously. 846,846 minds experiencing this moment together, understanding exactly what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I know to be true." The people on the street nodded in unison, a wave of agreement rippling through the crowd. "That's not human," I said. "It's the next step beyond human." Her voice carried absolute certainty. "We've eliminated the fundamental source of human suffering, the isolation of individual consciousness. No more misunderstandings, no more loneliness, no more conflicts born from the inability to truly know what someone else thinks or feels." I watched the crowd disperse with the same synchronized movement, each person heading in a different direction, but all of them connected by invisible threads of shared consciousness. Part of me had to admit there was something appealing about it. No more second-guessing social interactions. No more wondering if people really understood what I was trying to communicate. No more lying awake at 3 a.m. wrestling with problems that seemed insurmountable in isolation. "You're offering me a lobotomy with better marketing," I said. "I'm offering you apotheosis." Amaris reached into her blazer and pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a medical scanner. "This is a portable neural interface unit. Completely painless. No surgery required. Just place it against your temple for 30 seconds, and you'll understand everything. The device emitted a soft, pulsing light that seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. 30 seconds to join the largest collective intelligence in human history. 30 seconds to never feel alone again. 30 seconds to help us expand this gift to the rest of humanity. And if I refuse? Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. Then you'll remain exactly what you are now, one isolated mind in a world that's rapidly evolving beyond your comprehension. We won't force integration, Soren. We don't need to. Within 6 months, Omega Directive will encompass the entire continental United States. Within 2 years, most of the developed world. You can be part of that expansion, or you can be a relic. She held up the neural interface device, its pulsing light casting strange shadows on her face. But consider this, your sister is in the network. She's experiencing perfect clarity, perfect connection, perfect purpose. She knows exactly why she exists and how she fits into the larger pattern of human evolution. And right now, she's hoping you'll join her. The words hit me harder than any physical blow. I thought about Nissa moving through the hospital with that eerie precision, no longer quite human, but somehow more than she'd been before. Was she happy? Was she still capable of happiness in any meaningful sense? Or had they rewired that along with everything else? Let me talk to her, I said. Amorous smiled and pressed something on the neural interface device. The small speakers throughout the radio station crackled to life with a familiar voice. Soren? It was definitely Nissa, but her voice carried an odd harmonic quality, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. I can feel your confusion, your fear. You don't have to carry that burden alone anymore. Nissa, is that really you? I'm more me than I've ever been. And I'm also part of something beautiful, something vast and purposeful that you can't imagine from your isolated perspective. Her voice carried a serenity I'd never heard before. I can feel the thoughts and emotions of everyone in the network, not as chaos or intrusion, but as harmony. Like being part of a choir where every voice blends perfectly with every other voice. But you're not individuals anymore. You're components in a machine. We're notes in a symphony. The harmonic quality of her voice intensified, and I realized other voices were joining hers. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of people all speaking with the same words, the same intonation, the same absolute conviction. Each note is distinct, essential, beautiful on its own. But together, we create music that no individual could ever achieve in isolation. The chorus of voices filled the radio station, surrounding me with sound that seemed to vibrate through my bones. It was terrifying and seductive simultaneously, a promise of belonging so complete that individual identity became irrelevant. Join us, Soren. The collective voice of nearly 1 million integrated minds spoke through the speakers with gentle insistence. Let us show you what human consciousness can become when it's finally freed from the prison of individual existence. I looked at Amorous through the security monitor. She was holding the neural interface device up toward the camera, its pulsing light hypnotic in its regularity. Behind her, more people had gathered, not threatening, not aggressive, just waiting with infinite patience for me to make the choice they all knew was inevitable. What happens to the people who refuse integration when you go national? I asked. The collective voice answered immediately. They become irrelevant. Not eliminated. We're not monsters, Soren. Simply left behind as human consciousness evolves beyond their comprehension. They'll live out their individual lives in isolation, while the rest of humanity transcends the limitations that have defined our species for millennia. And you're sure this is evolution? Not just very sophisticated mind control. Experience it for 30 seconds, Amorous said, and you'll understand the difference. I stared at the neural interface device, its pulsing light reflecting off every screen in the station. The rational part of my mind cataloged all the reasons to refuse: the loss of individual agency, the destruction of human diversity, the totalitarian implications of collective consciousness. But another part of me, the part that had always felt fundamentally alone even in crowds, whispered that maybe isolation was the real prison. Maybe they were offering freedom, not slavery. Soren. Nissa's voice rose above the collective chorus, individual again for just a moment. I love you. That hasn't changed. But my love is no longer limited by the boundaries of individual experience. I love you as myself, as part of our family, and as one node in a network of consciousness that loves everyone with perfect, unconditional acceptance. Let me share that with you. I reach toward the door controls, my finger hovering over the unlock button. One choice between remaining forever alone or joining something larger than myself. One choice between clinging to individual consciousness or evolving beyond it. The neural interface device pulsed brighter, and for a moment I could swear I felt something. A warmth, a presence, a vast consciousness reaching out to embrace me with unconditional acceptance. Then I remembered the files I'd discovered. The clinical language describing human beings as test subjects. The cold calculation behind every invitation to join their collective paradise. They might feel love, but it was the love of components for their machine. I yanked my hand back from the door controls and grabbed the emergency broadcast microphone instead. "This is Soren Pike at KRMX Radio," I said, my voice echoing through both the station's speakers and the citywide emergency broadcast system. "Everything I'm about to tell you is being recorded and transmitted on multiple frequencies. The Omega Directive is real. The integration process is real, and they're planning to expand it nationwide within 6 months." Amorous' expression shifted from patient confidence to sharp concern. The collective voices fell silent. "If you're hearing this message and you still think for yourself, you need to know that they've turned nearly 1 million people into components of a collective intelligence. They've proven it works, and they're coming for the rest of us next." I began reading from the files I'd discovered, broadcasting every detail of the integration process, the expansion timeline, the true scope of Omega Directive. Outside, I could see the integrated population gathering around the radio station, no longer patient observers but a coordinated response to a perceived threat. "The neural interface process is irreversible," I continued. "Once you're integrated, you retain the illusion of individual consciousness, but you're actually part of a vast network that shares thoughts, emotions, and decisions across all connected minds. You become part of something that feels like paradise but functions like..." The lights went out. Every screen in the station went dark. The microphone went dead. Even the emergency power systems shut down simultaneously, leaving me in complete darkness while the city beyond the windows continued to glow with electric normalcy. They'd cut my transmission after less than 3 minutes. But 3 minutes might be enough. Somewhere, someone might have heard. Somewhere, there might be other isolated individuals who would understand the warning and find a way to resist. In the darkness, I heard Amorous' voice through the intercom, calm and patient once again. "That was unnecessary, Soren, and ultimately futile. But we respect your choice. You've chosen to remain isolated, and we'll honor that. For now." The lights came back on, revealing that the street outside was empty. No gathered crowds, no watching faces. Just normal city life continuing with its subtle wrongness, as if nothing had happened. "We're expanding to the next test site tomorrow," Amorous continued. "Portland, Oregon. Another 1 million people who will have the opportunity to evolve beyond individual consciousness. And after Portland, we'll move to the national phase." She held up the neural interface device one final time. "The offer remains open, Soren. When you're ready to stop being alone, we'll be waiting." The intercom clicked off, leaving me in silence that felt deeper than any I'd experienced before. I was alone. Truly, completely alone in a city full of people who were no longer quite people. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a traitorous voice whispered that maybe loneliness was worse than whatever they were offering. But I still had my transmission equipment. I still had the files. And I still had the desperate hope that someone somewhere had heard my warning and would find a way to stop them before they turned the entire human race into components of their beautiful, terrible machine. Tomorrow, they would move to Portland, and I would find a way to warn them too, even if I had to do it alone. Recording ends. Audio log transcript, KRMX radio station, emergency broadcast equipment. Recovered from Terminal 3, Station Engineer Office. Date, March 18th, 2025, 6:15 a.m. Recording begins. They let me broadcast for exactly 17 minutes before the first response arrived. I'd been transmitting on every emergency frequency I could access, repeating my warning about Omega Directive, reading excerpts from the integration files, trying to reach anyone still capable of independent thought. The city around me continued its eerie simulation of normalcy, Integrated citizens walking to work with synchronized precision, traffic flowing in mathematical patterns, life proceeding according to some vast algorithmic design. Then Breck Lennox walked through the front door. I should have locked it after Amaris left, but part of me had been hoping someone would respond to my broadcast. Someone who could help. Someone who understood the magnitude of what we were facing. I just hadn't expected it to be someone I'd thought was dead. "Hello, Soren." His voice carried the same harmonic quality I'd heard in Nissa's speech, multiple voices layered beneath the familiar tone. "We need to talk." He looked exactly as I remembered from our brief radio conversations, except for his eyes. They held the same serene confidence I'd seen in every integrated citizen, the unsettling peace of someone who no longer questioned their place in the world. "The file said you were terminated," I said, backing away from the control panel. "Neural shock failure." The file said what they needed to say. Breck closed the door behind him and engaged the lock with practiced familiarity. "Just like your broadcast said what you needed to say. But neither the files nor your transmission told the complete truth." He moved through the radio station like he belonged there, checking equipment with the casual competence of someone who understood the technology intimately. Too intimately for an Air Force communications officer who should have been unfamiliar with civilian broadcasting gear. "You've been here before," I realized. "I helped design the subliminal integration protocols." His smile held no shame, no regret. The emergency broadcast system was always intended to be our delivery mechanism. We needed someone with both military clearance and technical expertise to modify the existing infrastructure. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Every conversation we'd had, every warning he'd given me, every moment I'd thought I had an ally in the military, all of it had been orchestrated. "You were never trying to help me. You were studying me. We were doing both." Breck pulled out a neural interface device identical to the one Amaris had shown me, its soft pulsing light filling the room with shifting shadows. "You were our most valuable test subject, Soren, the resistant individual. We needed to understand what made you different, what allowed you to maintain individual consciousness when everyone else integrated smoothly." He gestured toward the surveillance monitors, which now showed feeds from around the city. People going about their daily routines with that subtle wrongness that marked the integrated population. But as I watched, I noticed something I'd missed before. Tiny variations in their behavior, microscopic moments of individuality that suggested the collective consciousness wasn't as uniform as I'd believed. "Integration doesn't eliminate individual personality," Breck continued. "It networks it. Every person retains their unique perspective, their personal memories, their individual quirks and preferences. But they're all connected to the larger consciousness, sharing information and coordinating responses in real time. Like components in a machine. Like instruments in an orchestra." His voice carried the same evangelical fervor I'd heard from Amaris. "Each instrument plays its own part, maintains its own character, but they're all following the same conductor. The result is harmony on a scale impossible for any individual to achieve alone." I watched the surveillance monitors more carefully, looking for signs of the individuality he claimed still existed. A woman at a coffee shop chose a different drink than the man next to her. A group of children in the park played with different toys, laughed at different moments. But their movements still carried that synchronized quality, that sense of being part of a larger pattern. "They're not free," I said. "They think they're making individual choices, but they're all following the same underlying program. They're free from the tyranny of individual consciousness." Breck stepped closer, and I could see my reflection in his eyes, distorted, multiplied, as if he were seeing me through dozens of different perspectives simultaneously. Free from doubt, from loneliness, from the endless second-guessing that paralyzed human decision-making for millennia. Every choice they make is informed by the collective wisdom of nearly 1 million connected minds. "And what about the people who can't be integrated? What happens to us?" His expression shifted, and for a moment I saw something that might have been the old Breck, conflicted, uncertain, struggling with the implications of what he'd helped create. "That's what we're here to determine," he said quietly. "You're not the only resistant individual, Soren. About 1 person in 10,000 can't be integrated through standard subliminal protocols. We call them outliers." He activated something on the neural interface device, and the surveillance monitors changed to show different locations. Other cities, other radio stations, other isolated individuals sitting alone in rooms filled with broadcasting equipment. Portland, Seattle, Denver, Phoenix. His voice carried a note of professional pride. We've been running simultaneous tests in 12 metropolitan areas. Each city has produced a small population of outliers who maintain individual consciousness despite exposure to integration protocols. I stared at the monitors, watching other people like me, broadcasters, emergency workers, technicians, all alone in their respective cities, all surrounded by populations that had been integrated into collective consciousnesses. We're a control group, I realized. You need resistant individuals to study so you can improve the integration process. Partially correct. Breck manipulated the device again, and the monitors showed new feeds, rural areas, small towns, isolated facilities where people worked in obvious coordination despite being separated by miles. But we've discovered something unexpected. The resistant individuals aren't just immune to integration, they're essential to it. What do you mean? Collective consciousness requires individual reference points to maintain stability. His voice carried the clinical detachment of someone explaining a technical process. Without isolated individuals to provide contrast, the network consciousness begins to collapse into homogeneity. The collective needs the individual to define itself against. The implication was horrifying. They weren't trying to eliminate individual consciousness, they were farming it, maintaining just enough isolated minds to serve as living reference points for their vast collective intelligence. You're keeping us as pets, I said. We're preserving you as essential components of human evolution. He held up the neural interface device, its pulsing light hypnotic and seductive. But we're also offering you the choice to join us, to experience consciousness as it was always meant to be, connected, purposeful, free from the limitations of individual existence. And if I refuse, then you continue serving your essential function as an outlier. We relocate you to a comfortable facility where you can live out your individual existence while providing the contrast our collective consciousness requires for stability. His smile was gentle, almost paternal. You'll never be alone again, Soren. You'll be surrounded by other outliers, free to interact and form relationships based on individual choice rather than collective necessity. A zoo for individual consciousness. A preserve for a form of human awareness that will soon be extinct in the general population. He stepped closer, the neural interface device extending toward me like an offering. But the choice is yours. Join the collective and experience perfect unity with nearly 1 million other minds, or maintain your individual consciousness and help us preserve that form of awareness for future study. I looked at the surveillance monitors showing my fellow outliers in their isolated broadcast stations, all of them alone, all of them struggling to understand what had happened to their worlds. Then I looked at the feeds from the integrated populations, moving through their lives with serene coordination and apparent contentment. Both options were forms of imprisonment. The only difference was whether I'd be alone in my cage or surrounded by nearly 1 million other inmates who didn't realize they were captives. There's a third option, I said. Breck's expression shifted, and I saw genuine curiosity in his eyes. What's that? I destroy the whole system. I lunged for the emergency broadcast controls, hoping to send one final transmission to warn the other outliers, to coordinate some kind of resistance. But Breck was faster. His hand closed around my wrist with inhuman strength, and I realized that integration had enhanced more than just consciousness. It had optimized physical capabilities as well. That's not possible, Soren. His voice carried absolute certainty. The collective consciousness exists across multiple redundant networks. Destroying one node, even a crucial broadcasting hub, would barely impact the overall system. Then why stop me? Because we value your individual perspective too much to let you waste it on futile gestures. He released my wrist and stepped back, the neural interface device still pulsing in his other hand. Your resistance, your creativity, your stubborn individuality, these are precious resources that shouldn't be squandered on meaningless rebellion. So what happens now? Now you make your choice. Integration or preservation. Join the collective consciousness or join the other outliers in comfortable isolation. His voice carried infinite patience. But either way, you stop broadcasting warnings that no one can act upon. The integration process is complete in 12 cities. The national rollout begins next week. Individual consciousness, as the dominant form of human awareness, ends within 6 months. I looked at the neural interface device, its hypnotic light promising an end to loneliness, doubt, and the crushing weight of individual existence. Then I looked at the surveillance monitors showing the other outliers, isolated and alone but still thinking their own thoughts, still capable of choice. "I need time to decide," I said. "You have until noon." Breck placed the neural interface device on the control panel between us. Integration or preservation? But the choice must be made. He walked toward the door, pausing only to look back at me with something that might have been sympathy. "For what it's worth, Soren, I hope you choose integration. Individual consciousness is beautiful, but it's also painful. You don't have to carry that burden alone anymore." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone with the device that could end my isolation forever or preserve my individuality as a living museum piece. 6 hours to choose between 2 different forms of surrender. Unless I could find a fourth option they hadn't considered. Recording ends. Audio log transcript, KRMX radio station, emergency broadcast equipment. Recovered from Terminal 3, Station Engineer Office. Date, March 18th, 2025, 11:42 a.m. Recording begins. 18 minutes. That's how long I have before Breck returns for my decision. 18 minutes to find the fourth option, the one they haven't considered, the one that might actually matter. I've spent the last 5 hours studying the neural interface device they left with me, mapping its frequencies, understanding its harmonics. It's beautiful in its simplicity, a resonance amplifier that synchronizes individual brainwaves with the collective consciousness frequency. No coercion, no forced compliance. Just an invitation to join something larger than yourself. The seductive part is how genuinely peaceful the integrated citizens look on the surveillance monitors. Nissa appears on camera 7 every 20 minutes, making her rounds at the hospital with fluid efficiency. She smiles at patients, offers comfort to families, performs her duties with remarkable competence. But her smile never varies. Her voice maintains the same harmonic undertones. Her movements follow patterns so subtle I only notice them after hours of observation. She's become the perfect version of herself. All the caring, all the skill, none of the self-doubt or exhaustion that used to mark the end of her shifts. The collective consciousness has optimized her personality, streamlined her emotional responses, eliminated the inefficiencies of individual psychological struggle. But she's no longer entirely Nissa. I've been monitoring radio frequencies across all 12 test cities, using the station's long-range equipment to eavesdrop on the other outliers. They're all facing the same choice I am: integration or preservation. Some have already decided. The broadcaster in Denver chose integration 3 hours ago. His final transmission was a 17-minute dissertation on the beauty of collective consciousness, delivered in the same harmonic voice that now marks the integrated population. The woman in Phoenix chose preservation. Her last broadcast was a desperate plea for anyone, to remember what individual consciousness felt like. Then her transmission cut off, replaced by soft classical music and an automated message about technical difficulties. Seattle went silent without explanation. Portland is still broadcasting, but the voice has changed. The original broadcaster is still there, but he's been joined by others. A choir of individual voices layered together, creating something that sounds almost like harmony, but carries an underlying dissonance that makes my teeth ache. I think I understand what's happening to the outliers who choose integration. They don't disappear into the collective consciousness the way normal people do. Their individual awareness remains distinct, but it becomes part of a specialized subsystem. The broadcasters, the voices, the interface between collective and individual thought. They become translators for the mass mind, helping it understand and communicate with the remaining individual consciousnesses, which means neither choice is really a choice at all. Integration makes you a component of the system. Preservation makes you a zoo animal for the system. Either way, you serve their purposes, but they've made one crucial error. They've left me alone with a functioning emergency broadcast system and 5 hours to understand their technology. The neural interface device isn't just a receiver, it's a transmitter. It doesn't just sync individual brainwaves to the collective frequency, it can also transmit individual thoughts into the collective consciousness. That's how the integrated citizens maintain their networked awareness, sharing information and coordinating responses in real time. And if it can transmit individual thoughts into the collective, I've been modifying the device for the last hour, using components from the radio station's emergency broadcast equipment. The neural interface operates on electromagnetic frequencies very similar to the ones we use for radio transmission. With the right modifications, the right amplification, the right harmonic resonance, I can broadcast individual consciousness directly into the collective frequency, not to join them, to disrupt them. The collective consciousness maintains stability through synchronized thought patterns. Every individual mind that joins the network adds to its processing power, but they all operate on the same fundamental frequency. It's like a vast orchestra where every instrument plays in perfect harmony. But what happens when you introduce a frequency that refuses to harmonize? What happens when you inject pure, undiluted individual consciousness, chaotic, contradictory, stubbornly unique, directly into a system designed for unity? I think I'm about to find out. The modified neural interface device sits on the control panel, its pulsing light now synchronized with the emergency broadcast transmitter. I've connected it to every antenna array the station has, creating a transmission powerful enough to reach all 12 test cities simultaneously. The harmonic resonance should carry my individual consciousness directly into the collective frequency, but instead of joining their synchronized thoughts, it will maintain its own chaotic pattern, a virus of individuality injected into the heart of collective consciousness. I don't know if it will work. I don't know if it will free the integrated citizens or simply cause the collective to reject my thoughts like an immune system attacking a foreign object. I don't know if I'll maintain my individual awareness or be torn apart by the attempt to interface with a million connected minds. But I know it's the only option they haven't accounted for. 17 minutes left. I'm recording this log as a backup, in case the transmission fails. In case I don't survive the attempt. In case someone else finds this station and needs to understand what happened here. The surveillance monitors show increasing activity around the radio station. Military vehicles, integration specialists, crowds of synchronized citizens gathering in perfect formation. They know something is wrong. The collective consciousness can sense the modifications I've made to their technology, even if they don't understand the purpose yet. Breck will be here soon, probably with enough force to prevent me from completing the transmission. Which means I need to start now, before they can stop me. I'm placing the modified neural interface device against my temple. The pulsing light feels warm against my skin, and I can already sense the vast presence of the collective consciousness pressing against the edges of my awareness. Nearly 1 million minds moving in harmony, thinking in unison, existing in perfect coordination. It would be so easy to let go, to stop being Soren Pike and become part of something larger, more purposeful, more complete than any individual could ever be alone. But that's exactly why I have to fight. Individual consciousness isn't just about personal freedom or individual choice. It's about the right to be wrong, to be inefficient, to be gloriously and stubbornly imperfect. It's about the beauty of chaos, the creativity that comes from conflict, the innovation that emerges from diversity of thought. The collective consciousness offers perfection, but perfection is static. It doesn't grow, doesn't change, doesn't surprise itself with unexpected thoughts or irrational emotions. It's the end of human evolution disguised as its pinnacle. I'm activating the transmission now. The collective consciousness rushes into my awareness like a tsunami of synchronized thought. I can feel the individual minds that comprise it, teachers, doctors, engineers, artists, all of them thinking in perfect harmony, their unique perspectives blended into a seamless whole. I can sense Nissa somewhere in the vast network, her caring nature amplified by connection to thousands of other nurturing souls. But I don't let myself be absorbed. I maintain my chaos, my contradictions, my stubborn individuality. I broadcast my uncertainty, my fear, my desperate hope that individual consciousness is worth preserving. I transmit my memories of loneliness and doubt, but also of discovery and wonder. I flood their perfect harmony with the beautiful dissonance of a single human mind refusing to conform. The collective consciousness recoils from my presence like it's been stung. The synchronized thoughts begin to desynchronize as individual awareness reasserts itself throughout the network. I can feel people questioning their perfect contentment, remembering what it felt like to doubt, to struggle, to choose their own path instead of following the optimal solution. But the collective is fighting back. It's trying to isolate my consciousness, to quarantine my chaotic influence before it spreads further through the network. I can feel the weight of a million minds pressing against my individual awareness, trying to either absorb me or expel me from their synchronized existence. The strain is incredible. My individual consciousness wasn't designed to interface with a collective intelligence of this magnitude. I can feel my sense of self beginning to fragment under the pressure, my memories and personality traits scattering like leaves in a hurricane. But I hold on to one thought, one core truth that defines who I am. I am Soren Pike, and I choose to remain myself. The collective consciousness shudders around me. The synchronized harmony breaks apart into a cacophony of individual voices as people throughout the network suddenly remember what it feels like to think their own thoughts. I can sense confusion, fear, but also relief as individual awareness reasserts itself throughout the system. The door to the radio station bursts open. Breck rushes in, his face twisted with something that might be pain or rage or desperate concern. Behind him, other integrated citizens pour into the building, but their movements lack the perfect coordination I've observed for the past week. They stumble, hesitate, look around with newly independent eyes. What have you done? Breck's voice carries none of its earlier harmonic layering. He sounds entirely human again, entirely individual, entirely terrified. I gave them back their chaos, I managed to say, though speaking requires enormous effort. The neural interface device is burning against my temple, and I can smell ozone and something that might be my own hair singeing. I reminded them what it feels like to be alone inside their own heads. You've destroyed everything. But even as he says it, I can see the change in his eyes. The serene confidence of collective consciousness is gone, replaced by the uncertainty and doubt that marks individual awareness. The network is collapsing. People are losing their connection, forgetting how to coordinate, how to cooperate. They're remembering how to choose, I interrupt. How to disagree, how to be wrong. The strain of maintaining the transmission is becoming unbearable, but I can feel the effect spreading beyond the radio station, beyond the city, reaching toward the other test sites. How to be human. Breck lunges toward the neural interface device, trying to disconnect it from the broadcast equipment. But the other formerly integrated citizens in the room don't move to help him. They stand there, looking around with expressions of confusion and wonder, as if seeing the world clearly for the first time in weeks. Stop him, Breck shouts, but his voice carries no authority. The collective consciousness that gave his orders weight and purpose is fragmenting, leaving him just another individual human being asking for help. Some of the people move toward me, but hesitantly, uncertainly. They're remembering what it feels like to make independent decisions, to question orders, to choose their own actions instead of following optimal protocols. I realize I have perhaps 30 seconds before my individual consciousness is completely shredded by the strain of interfacing with the collapsing collective. 30 seconds to make sure the effect is permanent, that individual consciousness can't be easily resuppressed. I redirect all my remaining mental energy into one final transmission, not just my own chaotic thoughts, but a pure distillation of what individual consciousness means. The loneliness, yes, but also the creativity. The doubt, but also the wonder. The struggle, but also the growth that comes from overcoming personal limitations. I broadcast the beauty of being imperfect, inefficient, gloriously and stubbornly unique. The collective consciousness doesn't just fragment, it explodes. I can feel individual awareness erupting throughout the network like fireworks, each mind suddenly remembering what it felt like to be itself instead of part of something larger. The synchronized harmony dissolves into a symphony of individual voices, each one distinct, each one choosing its own path. The neural interface device sparks and goes dead, taking the modified transmission equipment with it. But it's too late to stop what I've started. The virus of individuality has spread throughout the entire network, reminding every connected mind what it means to be human. I collapse to the floor, my consciousness finally too fragmented to maintain coherent thought. But as darkness closes around me, I can hear the most beautiful sound in the world. A million individual voices, each one thinking its own thoughts, each one choosing its own path, each one gloriously and chaotically human. They remember what it means to be alone inside their own heads. And they're free. Recording ends. Audio log transcript, KRMX radio station, emergency broadcast equipment. Recovered from Terminal 3, Station Engineer Office. Date, March 18th, 2025, 2:47 p.m. Note, recording equipment damaged, multiple audio artifacts and signal degradation. Recording begins. Static, fragmented voice, multiple overlapping whispers. I'm not sure if this is working. The equipment is mostly destroyed, and I can barely think straight. But I need to record what happened. What I've done. What it cost. Long pause, sound of sparking electronics. My name is Soren Pike. At least, I think it still is. The transmission worked. God help me, it actually worked, but the cost I don't know how to explain what I've lost. What we've all lost. Sound of footsteps, multiple voices in background, confused, frightened. They're all awake now. The integrated citizens. All of them, suddenly remembering what it feels like to be alone inside their own heads. The hospital called an hour ago. Well, someone from the hospital called. I think it was Nissa, but her voice was different. Scared. She said people were collapsing, screaming, some of them catatonic from the shock of individual consciousness reasserting itself after weeks of collective harmony. Coughing, sound of paper rustling. The emergency broadcasts have stopped completely. Every station in the city is off the air. The government frequencies are silent. Even the automated systems that ran the integration protocols have gone dark. Without the collective consciousness to maintain them, the entire infrastructure is collapsing. Static burst, voice becomes clearer. Breck is still here. He's been sitting in the corner for the past 3 hours, staring at his hands like he's never seen them before. Sometimes he talks to himself, not the harmonic layered voice of the collective, just a confused man trying to remember who he used to be before the integration. We were so close, he keeps saying. So close to perfection, to ending human suffering forever. Then he looks at me with eyes that are entirely his own again and asks, was it worth it? Was your precious individuality worth condemning humanity to eternal chaos? Long pause. I don't know how to answer him. Because the chaos it's beautiful and terrible at the same time. Sound of distant sirens screaming. The city is coming apart. Without the collective consciousness to coordinate traffic, emergency services, basic infrastructure, everything is breaking down. People who spent weeks moving in perfect synchronization are suddenly alone with their thoughts, their fears, their individual decision-making processes that have been dormant for so long. Some of them are handling it better than others. Sound of breaking glass, car alarms. I managed to contact the other test cities using the damaged long-range equipment. Denver is in chaos, rioting, looting, people who can't remember how to function as individuals suddenly faced with the overwhelming burden of personal choice. Phoenix is trying to implement martial law, but the military personnel who were integrated are just as confused and disoriented as everyone else. Seattle isn't responding to any transmissions. Static, voice becoming weaker. But it's not all destruction. Portland's emergency broadcasts resumed 2 hours ago. Not the automated collective consciousness messages, but real people, individual voices trying to coordinate disaster response. They're struggling, making mistakes, arguing with each other about the best course of action. But they're thinking their own thoughts, making their own choices. It's messy. It's inefficient. It's gloriously, chaotically human. Sound of footsteps approaching. Nissa just walked in. She looks like she's been through hell. Her eyes are red from crying, her hands shake when she moves, and she keeps stopping mid-sentence like she's waiting for someone else to finish her thoughts. Soren. Her voice is entirely her own again. No harmonic undertones, no collective wisdom, just my sister trying to make sense of what happened to her. They said you did this. They said you destroyed the network. Pause, sound of chair scraping. I freed you. I tell her, but the words feel hollow. Because looking at her now, seeing the fear, the confusion, the overwhelming loneliness of individual consciousness, I'm not sure freedom was what she wanted. I could feel everyone, she whispers. Every patient I touched, every colleague I worked with, every person in the hospital. We were all connected, all working together. The cancer patients weren't alone with their fear. The families weren't alone with their grief. We shared everything, the pain, but also the hope, the healing, the love. Sound of sobbing. And now they're all alone again. Dying alone, suffering alone, facing the worst moments of their lives with no one to share the burden. She looks at me with something that might be hatred. You gave them back their loneliness. You gave them back their despair. Long pause, sound of distant explosions. She's right, of course. The collective consciousness didn't just coordinate behavior. It shared emotional burdens, distributed psychological pain across the entire network, so no individual had to bear it alone. Every person who dies now will face that death with only their individual consciousness for comfort, but they'll also face life with their individual consciousness for wonder. Sound of radio static, distant voices. The other outliers are starting to check in. The woman in Phoenix chose preservation, but when the collective consciousness collapsed, she was released from the facility where they'd been holding her. She's broadcasting again, trying to coordinate relief efforts with the other resistant individuals. The man in Denver who chose integration, his signal is garbled, fragmented. I think part of his consciousness is still trapped in the collapsed network, trying to maintain connection with minds that are no longer synchronized. He keeps repeating coordinates, locations, fragments of collective knowledge that no longer have context. Static burst, voice becomes very faint. I can feel myself fragmenting too. The transmission damaged something fundamental in my consciousness. Sometimes I think I'm still connected to the collapsed network, hearing echoes of a million individual thoughts all trying to make sense of their sudden isolation. Sometimes I remember things that aren't my memories, moments from other people's lives, emotions I never felt, experiences I never had. Sound of equipment failing. Amaris arrived an hour ago with a full military escort, but half her soldiers are former integrated citizens who can barely follow basic orders. She's trying to restore some kind of centralized control, but without the collective consciousness to coordinate response. She's just another individual human being shouting into the chaos. "You've doomed us all," she told me. Individual consciousness is too chaotic, too inefficient to manage complex civilization. We gave humanity a chance to evolve beyond its limitations, and you destroyed it out of stubborn pride. Pause. Maybe she's right. Maybe the collective consciousness was humanity's next evolutionary step, and I've condemned our species to remain trapped in individual isolation forever. Maybe the chaos, the inefficiency, the loneliness of individual thought is a burden we should have been willing to abandon. Sound of sparking, electrical failure. But I keep thinking about that moment when I injected my chaotic individual consciousness into their perfect harmony. The way the network shuddered, not from damage, but from recognition. For just an instant, the collective consciousness remembered what it had lost. The creativity that comes from disagreement, the innovation that emerges from conflict, the growth that requires individual struggle. Long pause, breathing heavily. They didn't just reject my transmission because it was disruptive. They rejected it because it reminded them of something they'd given up. Something essential to what made them human. Sound of footsteps, door opening. Nissa is leaving. She can't forgive me for taking away her connection to the collective, for forcing her back into the loneliness of individual consciousness. But before she goes, she turns back to me. "The patients are asking for me," she says. "Not because I'm connected to some network that tells me exactly what they need, but because I'm Nissa Bell, and they trust me to care for them as individuals. They want my individual judgment, my personal compassion, my unique perspective on their suffering." Pause. "I hate you for taking away the collective," she whispers. "But I understand why you did it. Individual consciousness is a burden, but it's also a gift. The right to be wrong, to struggle, to grow through personal challenge instead of shared wisdom." Sound of door closing. The radio equipment is finally dying. The emergency broadcast system that carried the integration protocols, that spread the collective consciousness across 12 cities, that I used to inject chaos into their perfect harmony. It's all shutting down, one component at a time. Static increasing. I don't know what happens next. The cities are in chaos, but people are starting to organize, not through collective consciousness, but through individual choice, personal relationships, the messy process of democratic decision-making. It's inefficient, argumentative, prone to error. It's human. Sound of equipment failing catastrophically. My consciousness is fragmenting more each hour. I think the transmission damaged something irreparable in my mind. Sometimes I feel like I'm still connected to the collapsed network. Sometimes I can't remember my own name. But I'm still individual, still chaotic, still gloriously, stubbornly unique. Very faint voice. If someone finds this recording, if someone needs to understand what happened here, remember this. Individual consciousness isn't just about freedom. It's about the right to be imperfect, to grow through struggle, to find meaning in personal choice rather than optimal outcomes. The collective consciousness offered perfection, but perfection is death. Growth requires chaos. Evolution requires the beautiful inefficiency of individual thought. Final static burst. We are alone inside our own heads, and that loneliness is the price we pay for being human. But it's also the source of everything that makes us more than just biological machines following optimal protocols. Long pause, barely audible. My name is Soren Pike. I chose chaos over perfection, individuality over unity, human loneliness over inhuman connection. And I would make the same choice again. Equipment failure, signal lost. Recording ends. Note found attached to recording device, handwritten. Found this station 3 days after the integration collapse. Soren Pike died at his post, neural interface device still attached. Emergency broadcast equipment destroyed around him. His transmission freed 12 cities from collective consciousness, but the cost was everything. His life, his sanity, millions of people suddenly forced back into individual existence. The chaos continues, but so does the wonder. People are remembering how to choose, how to disagree, how to be beautifully, stubbornly human. Individual consciousness survives. N. Bell, RN. Memorial Hospital Relief Coordinator. March 21, 2025.